They didn't travel by Cadillac, but by yellow school bus. Their trainer wasn't a star, but a journeyman of 30 years, and their jockey was a busted-up has-been. Everything about Funny Cide was uncommonly common. His sire was an unspectacular runner and unproven stud named Distorted Humor, who had won just 8 races in his career, none of them longer than a mile. His dam, Bell's Goodside, was an Oklahoma-bred mare who won just 2 of her 26 starts. Even his name was unregal. Funny Cide. It sounded like laughing yourself to death. Funny Cide wasn't the product of money and breeding, but rather of the vast middle class in horse racing. Had he belonged to a larger stable or fallen into the hands of a less conscientious trainer, he might not have become what he did. But he was a fortunate horse. Later, everyone involved with him would muse on the word if. If Joe and Ann McMahon hadn't foaled him. If Tony Everard hadn't seen something in the yearling. If Robin Smullen hadn't noticed his breathing problem. If the right people hadn't found him, bought him, and raced him. You could say that when it came to Funny Cide, things just lined up, like the digits of a combination lock, or the spinning of a roulette wheel in a ball. You could argue long and hard about chance and luck and whether it takes skill to hit a long shot. But that doesn't get you anywhere in trying to figure out what happened, where Funny Cide came from and why. What really happened was this. A group of small-time owners and trainers did the right thing by a sweet, unpromising horse. He was a matter of dumb luck meeting up with hard work. It wouldn't be right to say you earned him, but it wouldn't be wrong either. Maybe you let yourself in for a little luck after 30 years of labor to make a living for your family in your boots or your necktie. After all those years of devotion, you make an educated guess and a bold wager. So did you earn it? Maybe, maybe not. But did you deserve it? Hell yes. For 5 weeks, from April to June 2003, Funny Cide captivated the nation as he competed in the 3-race classic of American thoroughbred racing, the Triple Crown. At the same time, U.S. soldiers were fighting a foreign war, terrorists were lurking, corporations downsizing, pension plans collapsing. America needed some good news. It found it in a horse. Funny Cide made the front page of the newspapers in New York and the network morning shows. By the time he ran in the final event, the Belmont Stakes, a total of 7.4 million households would tune in to see him, making the race the top-rated TV program of any kind for that week in June. More than $6 million would be wagered on him at off-track betting parlors. 100,000 people would sit in the rain for 7 hours to see his stretch run. By then, it almost didn't matter whether he won or not. Sackets Harbor, New York. A workaday man named J.P. Constance stood on his front porch and blew on a horn. It wasn't a Viking blast or a long, elegant note of jazz, but a staggering, shrill, hilariously warped series of notes. If you listened hard, you could barely distinguish it as an off-key version of that tune from the racetrack. It was the call to the post. The notes echoed up and down Hounsfield Street, a small lane at the top of a hill in the village of Sackets Harbor. Village exactly described the shape and size of the place, because it wasn't big enough to be a town or a burg. It was just a painterly dash of color on the banks of the silver-gray disk of Lake Ontario, a body of water so seemingly horizonless it felt like God's own mirror. Scattered around a tiny crescent harbor was a collection of old Victorian shops and a grand total of 1,386 residents. Most of the people of Sackets, that's how they referred to it, abbreviated it to just plain Sackets, knew each other. They'd known each other from grade school through high school and college and the Army. Once they grew up, they sat next to each other on the planning board or the school board or the Chamber of Commerce board. Some of them married each other. Jack Knowlton, president of the Sackets High class of 1965, met his wife Dorothy at an 8th-grade dance. The natives of Sackets could count on 2 things: the steady wind that blew across Lake Ontario from Canada, and each other. J.P. Constance was their former mayor. He had been elected, he liked to joke, by bribing his neighbors with fresh baked goods. It took an awful lot of chocolate chip cookies, he said. The closeness of the residents was in part a function of the remoteness. Sackets was nearer to the Canadian border than to a major U.S. city. A highway sign proclaimed Canada 31, Syracuse 66. For any sign of a building taller than 2 stories, you had to go 10 miles down the road to Watertown, New York, a company town for the U.S. military's Fort Drum, a notoriously tough posting that was the jumping-off point for the 10th Mountain Division. A soldier stationed at Drum was liable to be shipping out for Afghanistan or Iraq, and soon. The only way to get to Sackets other than by boat was by a 2-lane highway from Watertown that wove through farmland, most of it less than prosperous. Farmhouses with cracked shingles, tin-roofed barns, and rusted silos. A roadside diner advertised, "We don't fool you, we feed you." At a Y intersection, a sign proclaimed, "Entering historic Sackets Harbor." From J.P. and Karen Constance's porch, he could see the homes of his best friends, most of them former schoolmates at Sackets High School. Directly across the street was his old friend and predecessor as mayor, Gene Darrowan, and his wife, Jeannie. Next door was the home of Peter Phillips, a retired utility company worker and former head of the school board, and his wife, Bonnie. Just around the corner lived Peter's brother, Mark Phillips, a retired math teacher with his wife, Gwen. At the far end of the block was the home of Bonnie's brother, Harold Kring, a construction company owner, and his wife, Stephanie. J.P. himself had lived in Sackets since the 3rd grade, and now he owned an optical shop in Watertown. He was a trim, bespectacled man of 53 with a neat wedge of gray-white hair, and he had the personality of a stand-up comic. His conversation was a constant teasing patter, and the result was that his porch was often headquarters for neighborly social gatherings that amounted to block parties. Hounsfield Street was composed of a row of single-story brick and siding ranch houses with good, well-tended gardens. At first glance, nothing set the street apart from any of the other narrow lanes of Sackets. But a second look left a more peculiar impression of incongruous details. A mailbox with the silhouette of a racehorse emblazoned on it. A lamppost held up by a figurine jockey. A horse blanket with a pattern of crimson and gray triangles emblazoned with the name Sackatoga. J.P. Constance, lifelong resident, working man, village comic, and former mayor of Sackets Harbor, blew his horn. The noise was joined by the sound of laughter from the homes of his neighbors. Gradually, one by one, they emerged and strolled up the street to J.P.'s porch. It was a call they all recognized. It was the call to cocktail hour. Belmont Park Racetrack, New York. Barclay Tagg was looking for an excuse to quit, but he couldn't find one. Tagg was tired, not just from working today or yesterday, but from the last 30-odd years. To look at him, his age was indeterminate. He was built like a knife blade, his body one long straight edge, from his iron polo shirt to his creased jeans, ending in sharp-toed leather boots with spurs. But there was something stiff and sore in the way he moved, and his chipped razor of a face told the real story, that he was older than his looks suggested. In fact, he was approaching 65, and a busted-up 65 at that. The stiffness was the result of his years as a steeplechaser when he was a young man, and his bones had the fracture lines to prove it. 6 cracked vertebrae. Now he had a steel rod in his back. Every morning, Tagg arrived at Belmont's Barn 6, in the dark, to tend to his modest string of horses. For 3 decades, he had risen at 4:30 a.m., hoisted himself onto and off of horses, fed them, hauled buckets, pried nails, raked hay, cleaned tack. In those 30 years, he'd taken 3 vacations. Directly across a narrow asphalt road from Tagg's barn was another barn, emblazoned with the initials DWL. The letters stood for D. Wayne Lucas, winner of a dozen Triple Crown races and the first trainer to reach $200 million in earnings, thanks to his corporatized approach to horses. The Belmont barn was just one part of Lucas's massive and extravagant thoroughbred operation. At his peak in the 1990s, he once had as many as 250 horses in his care. Among his wealthy owners were software giants and rappers, and in a stretch from 1985 to 90, they had spent over $100 million on thoroughbred purchases. On the side of the barn, a series of large painted plaques announced the names and victories of the various superstore horses that Lucas's stalls had housed. Thunder Gulch, winner of the Kentucky Derby and the Belmont. Charismatic, winner of the Derby and the Preakness. Tabasco Cat, winner of the Belmont Stakes.